Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Midweek Message for this week of May, 23 to 29. Okay, I am going to get right over there. There we go. This week we are going to continue our discussion around prayer and what it means for us. We're not going back to the book this week just because I ended up thinking about it so much. I wrote too much, and we'll go back to the book next week. So, Douglas Steere, who is a wonderful, wonderful thinker, Quaker thinker, has a quote that I have used many times, and I have loved it. So, what he says is, the pressure to do more and go faster is one of the subtlest forms of violence in our society. That is so profound and so true. I have thought about it since the first time I read it, and that was back in the early 90s. It is more true, I find, with each passing day. So that's the first thing I want you to think about to start us out with for why prayer might be important, why our spiritual lives might be important. Okay, Jürgen Habermas and other modern thinkers and postmodern thinkers, for that matter, discuss distraction in society as a means of keeping people's existence and understanding of reality on this really thin, shallow level, so that our lives are lived on this very thin sphere of reality, and we're missing all the depth, the beauty. So in some ways, it's related to Steer's idea of that pressure: do more, go faster, the distractions that we have, the multitudinous screens that we have, which are a problem for me. I'd be the first person to admit. I I find myself at the very end of the night, no matter how tired I am, playing a couple of hands of solitaire on my phone, which I know I shouldn't do. I know the blue light's bad for me. All I'm saying, those distractions, they're real. There are so many ways for us to be distracted in our society and to be pushed and to hurry and to see things. We are constantly seeing things. I've read a couple of great articles about visual addiction, and man, it really makes sense. We see these things, and in some ways it prevents us from taking the time to reflect and to be quiet, even to listen, to hear. I don't think that we listen as well as we used to. So there is this sort of shallow level of reality that we tend to live on between distraction and the pressure to do more and go faster. So we've become a society who barely notices what's around us or takes that time to pause and to reflect, to focus, to integrate all the things that are happening so that we can derive some kind of meaning and purpose in our lives, that larger purpose, that kind of focus and integration gives us. So thanks to reading thinkers such as these, who I've really been grateful for in my life, I've thought long and hard about all the ways we are socialized out of any awareness of spirit, any awareness of the deeper and quieter and just other layers of reality and meaning that exist around us and inside us. More specifically, for our discussion of around prayer, we are also trained out of any attitude or awareness that encourages prayer or encourages openness to listening to God and to listening for God. Worse, we tend to have a pretty limited idea of what prayer is or what prayer can be. We tend to think about it as mere words. Uh, Better, we might think of it as a two-way conversation or possibly just as a form of meditation. As you know, we've been talking about prayer for people who can't sit still, frankly, like me, and who don't relate all that well to the limited conventional forms that prayer takes in our current society. Because, the more you limit it, the less attractive it is, the more we forget it, and the more we start searching again, maybe in different and not as good ways. We reinvent the wheel looking for spirit when we have a huge history and tradition that, sure, has some bad things, but also has some beautiful, beautiful things, beautiful traditions that we can draw upon. So last week we discussed dance as a form of prayer and as an entryway into prayer. So I have another story for you. Now, if you've heard any of my sermons, you've probably heard this one at one point or another, but any good story is worth telling more than once. So the very first time I ever went to a Quaker meeting, I went with a friend, and I didn't really know what to expect. I mean, I'd read about it, so intellectually I knew what to expect, and he told me about what to expect. But it's really different when you sit in silence and in an intentional silence with a whole bunch of other people for an hour. Now, of course, almost everyone there was more comfortable than I was because it was my first time there. But I sat there, and I'm a minister's kid, so I just started to pray, and I prayed and prayed, and I prayed for all of the things that were on my mind, all of my worries, all of my joys. I did take time to be grateful, but I prayed about all the bad things too, the things I was worried and fussed about. And then I started to, go past that, and I prayed for my community, and I prayed for my friends, and I prayed for my family. And then eventually, of course, you get to the point, just like in the prayers of the people, where we pray for all people. You pray for the world, you pray for creation. And I prayed and prayed and prayed, and I prayed myself out, and I realized that there was like it wasn't over yet. So I furtively looked at my watch, and only about 15 minutes had gone by. Maybe I'm a fast talker, but it was not an hour. And I thought, oh no, what am I going to do now? I've got 45 minutes left to just sit here. But that silence, that intentional, beautiful silence was where I stopped talking and I started listening, and I started becoming more aware, and I got more comfortable with the silence. And that, in that moment, was when I really felt the presence of God. And I realized, oh, this is why people come here. That intentional silence, that silence that we did as a community together, was a profound way for me to come back after, a real crisis of faith in my own life. That was my way back. And it wasn't talk, and it wasn't preaching, it was listening. And in the years that I spent in the Quaker meeting, I was always amazed at how often the Spirit moved in a similar way. And afterwards, because we tended to eat lunch back in the Twin Cities Friends meeting, we would eat lunch at least once a month together. And um, the talk around the tables, it's amazing how many of us, the Spirit did move, and the same thoughts, the same concerns would surface. And it's not because we were all politically the same. That's certainly, there's a huge diversity of people there, lots of different people for lots of different reasons. But that act of listening for God, that is so profound. Now, that is a very quietistic form, I think, of the charismatic movement. Frankly, it's a very quiet but very receptive way to pray. Um, there are different forms of prayer. I mean, that's my point. There are different forms of prayer in our own Christian tradition that are incredibly varied. So there is that beautiful silence. Takes a while to get used to. Totally worth it. And I would encourage all of you to go to a few Quaker meetings, because they are, or we could do one in our church. They're beautiful. But we also have, Ignatian prayer and imaginative prayer, that whole beautiful uh, uh, practice of putting yourself in a gospel story, or putting yourself in a situation, imagining yourself there, and how God responds to you. Or other forms of guided prayer, or the labyrinth, which is thousands of years old and a beautiful, I mean, when you go to Europe and you find these beautiful labyrinths on the floors of the cathedrals, oh, what a privilege to walk. These are all different ways that are more or less active, but there's so many different beautiful things in our own tradition to be faithful. All kinds of ways to be open to God. So movement and song and music and action of various kinds can all be different forms of focus. For some people, dance is a way to focus and becomes a prayer. For another, music can become a prayer. For another, going for a walk or a run can focus them enough to become a prayer. And prayers do not have to have words, but they do have to have feelings and focus and intention. And many times, of course, they do have words, but they don't have to. And sometimes just that focus, that receptivity to the Spirit moving in us, to God, who is love, just the awareness can be enough. And some kind of movement often can help you express the feelings you need to communicate to God. So for me, there are times when I'm thinking about the state of the world, and it's overwhelming to me right now, especially. And I need to communicate that and to look for ways to do what I can, no matter how small my part in the great web of reality is. And those are the times when movement, when dance and running and walking, or smaller movements, drawing, or for me, writing a story can be a great help. So much of our journeys, so much of our journey in our bodies, in our spiritual and physical and emotional and mental selves is about focus and integration, which is so important. And it's one of the ways that we can ameliorate the negative effects of all the distractions out there. And prayer is a powerful way that we can integrate the various selves and bring ourselves into balance and awareness of all of the things happening inside us and around us. Because we are our bodies. We are our bodies. Our spirits don't reside in our bodies. Our bodies are us. And we are our spirits. We are our consciousness. We are our consciousness in this body. We are profoundly connected, possibly in ways that we don't even think about. I mean, think about scientifically, our autonomic nervous systems make decisions for us all the time without us even thinking about it. I mean, you're not thinking about the fact that you're breathing right now. Of course you're not. And or fight or flight. We have that vagus nerve, that autonomic stuff that happens that we don't have to think expressly about. Or our gut microbiomes. There's all of this stuff being written and researched right now about how our gut informs our brain. So happy gut means happy brain. So eating healthy and making sure you have the right probiotics and prebiotics and all of that stuff, that's important. These are things that inform who we are so what we eat literally informs our moods. The stressors that we live with. I mean, some are good challenges, but some are bad stresses and they take their toll as well. All of these things inform how we feel. And integrating all of this, making sense of all of it is an essential part of our prayer life. And it's an essential part of our walk with God. And it is an essential way of integrating the spirit, the body. I mean, they're always integrated. But I think because we live so much in our heads, we forget that. And we need ways to integrate. We need ways to recognize and remember, as in remember, to bring back into our bodies all of the things that make us us and also make it impossible to be us. And prayer can do that. Prayer is such a great thing for that. Being open to listening for God is also another way to inform that creaturely part of us. So the creaturely part of creation is not separate from the spiritual part any more than the emotional or psychological part is separate from this creaturely or bodily part. I mean, what a miracle we are. And on a bad day, what a hot, complicated mess. That's just the way it is. That's the way life is. And we know that. And it's also why all the practices of prayer through movement, through singing and dancing, through yoga or meditation, through those Ignatian imaginative prayers that we occasionally do together at church, through our words and our actions and reflections and intentions, all these aspects of being alive can crystallize at the point of God, who is love, and can crystallize at the point of prayer. This informs and coalesces who we are and who we want to become in the higher purpose of God's love and in the higher purpose of God's dream and hope for us. So it's why we pray, and it's why we need to pray, however we find to do that, celebrating all the many, many ways that we can connect with God. So, as you go through this week, let prayer focus you. Allow it to integrate all the many parts that are you, that inform what you think and how you feel, especially when you're living too much in your head and you forget that, you know, all of this is one. And God is love, and God is one, and we are part of that love, that web of reality that we live in, and that higher purpose that we are called to. So let love focus you in all the ways that you can find to pray this week and experiment. There's lots of ways to pray. Try a few different ones. So next week, we'll go back to the book. The next chapter is going to be about focusing your intention or concerns onto something and then throwing it out as a release or as a way to express yourself in an imaginative or creative way. So that'll be chapter 3 of our book. So until next week, and in this together with you, as always, this is Reverend Stephanie signing off.